Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kouri Marshall, and I'm the State and Local Government Relations Director at the Chamber of Progress. We're here today to urge Governor Polis to veto SB 25-086, a bill that would force social media platforms to act as law enforcement, and in doing so, threatens free expression and online safety, especially for communities that already face systematic barriers offline and online. This bill isn't about protecting kids, it's about government overreach. And it would create a chilling effect on free speech, especially for Black, Latino, LGBTQ, and low income youths who utilize social media to build community, organize, and share their lived experiences. If this bill became law, it would surely lead to a costly legal battle. Today, we're joined by two incredible advocates who bring deep expertise and perspectives on what's at stake. First, we'll introduce Anaya Robinson, the Senior Policy Strategist with the ACLU of Colorado. Are you there?
I am.
There we go. And then we're going to be joined by Hazel Gibson, the Political Director at Progressive Now, Colorado.
Hi.
Hi, Hazel. Thank you both so much for being here. We're going to turn to you, Anaya, to give us a lay of the land and some perspective on this bill and why it's bad public policy. And then we'll turn right on over to Hazel and we'll dive into a few questions. Anaya?
Yeah. Hey, all. My name's Anaya Robinson. He, him. I'm the senior policy strategist with the ACLU of Colorado. While we share the intent of keeping kids safe online with the bill sponsors and proponents of Senate Bill 86, the reality is when we begin to consciously erode the First Amendment rights of some, we are effectively eroding the First Amendment rights of all. While we agree that a social media platform has the right to remove users for violating their policies, a government mandate to remove a user from a speech platform remains a major concern and should for us all. The mandated removal for a violation of a platform's policy is restrictive of an individual's continuation of their right to free speech. Just because an individual may engage in an instance of unprotected speech does not negate their right to exercise their First Amendment on a speech platform altogether. Regardless of access to other forms of social media that proponents say assuage this concern, the government requiring the removal of any person from any speech platform should raise flags. In 2017, a unanimous decision in Pakenham v. North Carolina, the Supreme Court unanimously decided that states can't broadly limit access to social media because cyberspace is, quote, one of the most important places to exchange views. This case was a challenge to a North Carolina statute that barred individuals convicted of sex offenses from accessing social media. The decision also stated, quote, here, in one of the first cases the court has taken to address the relationship between the First Amendment and the modern internet, the court must exercise extreme caution before suggesting that the First Amendment provides scant protection for access to vast networks in that medium. Social media allows users to gain access to information and communicate with one another on any subject that might come to mind. With one broad stroke, North Carolina bars access to what, for many, are the principal sources for knowing current events, checking ads for employment, speaking and listening in the modern public square, and otherwise exploring the vast realms of human thought and knowledge. Foreclosing access to social media altogether thus prevents users from engaging in the legitimate exercise of First Amendment rights. Even convicted criminals, and in some instances, especially convicted criminals, might receive legitimate benefits from these means for accessing to the world of ideas, particularly if they seek to reform and to pursue lawful and rewarding lives, end quote. If the Supreme Court holds that the state cannot limit access to social media of individuals for violating law, allowing language into statute that limits access to social media for individuals who violate a private company's policy is absolutely a bridge too far. Every subject use that this bill contemplates is already criminalized. There are already tools available to charge and prosecute individuals with full due process. There are already tools to ensure that social media platforms comply with those investigations and prosecutions. And if those tools aren't sufficient, that is what should be legislated here. Our state government should not be mandating private entities to act as judge and jury to determine whether or not our most foundational rights can be restricted or removed.
Thank you so much. Our state government should not be mandating private entities on social media and free enterprise. That is a very really well laid out. Hazel, we'll go over to you now.
I don't know that I can do it as just much justice as Anaya did. But I will say for me, I am a mom. I'm a mom of two kids. I actually have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. And I understand the goal of this bill. I understand that we want to protect our children. We all want the same thing when it comes to that. However, this bill goes beyond. It goes beyond that. It does violate our First Amendment. It specifically tells social media companies that when someone has violated their policies, that they have to be removed within 10 days. Um, and that is a major concern. It's a major concern that we have government stepping in and telling a private company and policing speech the government doesn't like, especially vague and defined categories of speech. The other part is a lot of the arguments around this bill that I've continuously heard, because this is not the first time we've actually seen something similar. We heard it last year as well, is that tech companies that on social media platforms aren't doing enough, that they're giving that kids are going online and purchasing guns and drugs and other things. The issue with that is this bill actually gives tech companies more power. It actually makes them an extension of law enforcement, which if we're already struggling with the power they have, I don't think giving them more power is going to be the solution to those problems. And I mean, a major concern of this bill for my organization is also we know that kids of color are already over policed in real life, and now we're expanding that dynamic into the digital world. And we know that this bill will be used to target our most vulnerable communities. So for our organization, we support everything the ACLU has said and are happy to be at the table to try to get the governor to veto this bill. I think that the end goal is to protect children, but we can't do it by giving away our rights at the same time. So that is where we sit when it comes to this legislation.
Thank you so much, Hazel. You pointed out something very powerful and poignant, and I hope that the folks who have joined us today, we'd like to thank all of the folks who are sitting as a part of our listening audience, and especially to the community and members of the press who are joined with us today. To recap what Hazel just noted, this bill gives tech companies more power, not less. I have to repeat it because it is a fact that I think rings true of why we should be alarmed and paying attention to this flag, as Naya pointed out previously. This bill gives tech companies more power. That could be a headline in itself. I have a question for both of you. Um, could this bill be seen as the open door to over policing of digital spaces in the same way we've seen over policing in physical communities, particularly those that are low income and predominantly Black or Brown? Can either of you or both of you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy answer to that question, Kouri, is yes, right? I think data and history show us that whenever there is the presence or even mere assumption of criminal behavior, criminal activity, policing targets marginalized groups at much greater rates. And I don't think that whether it's in a physical space or a digital space, that the reality of that history is going to change.
Hazel, did you want to comment on that? Well, we'll go on to the next question. Governor Polis has raised concerns about the bill's impact on privacy and innovation. What civil liberties or constitutional protections do you believe are most at risk if this bill does become law? And who do you think stands to lose the most?
Yeah, I think as I shared before, when we begin to consciously erode the First Amendment for some, we are doing it for everybody. Um, this bill poses a significant risk, not only to those of us in Colorado, but outside of Colorado as well. When legislation passes in a state, other states take notice and it emboldens them to follow suit. And when that legislation weakens our most fundamental rights, that ripple continues throughout the entire country. And when we identify legislative fixes to these problems that are real, right? We need to figure out mechanisms to better protect children online. That is true. I don't know that anybody really is disputing that. But we can't do it at the cost of our most fundamental rights in this country and something that each one of us, regardless of who we are constitutionally entitled to.
So, final question. Oh, Hazel, go ahead. Did you have anything to add
No,
to
I
that?
just wanted to also add that when in history have we given up rights willingly and ever gotten them back? That isn't how this usually works. And I, I understand, like I said, to protect kids. I have kids. I just don't think it's the government's job to parent my children. It's my job. It is my job to be there. It is my job to make sure they're safe. It is my job to have parental controls and all of that. And those tools are at my disposal and I use them. So I don't understand why we are asking the government to take away our rights in the name of protecting children. I just don't think that that is not how we should be operating in times that are as scary as what we're currently seeing federally.
Thank you for that. Final question for me, and then we're going to turn to the audience for questions. If you're a part of our listening audience today, we encourage you to drop a question to the panelists. We have two fantastic freedom fighters here with us today. I'm honored to have them both join us. My final question before we do turn to the audience is, if you were sitting with Governor Polis about this bill, sitting down with Governor Polis about this bill today, what would you say to him? Well, I can start. Governor, veto this bad piece of legislation.
I would definitely say veto this legislation. I'd also say that he and I don't always agree on a lot. We actually don't see the world the same uh, a lot of the times, quite frankly. And I mean, that's what makes our country great. But I think that he is alarmed, and we should all be alarmed. We should all be alarmed that this is the kind of legislation that we're repeatedly seeing, and I don't actually think it addresses the real problems at hand. And I think that we need to get prepared that we're going to continue to see this legislation. So I appreciate being on the same team on this with him, and thank you for your leadership.
Yeah, I mean,
Anaya.
I agree with both of your sentiments. I think I would share much of what I've already shared here today. I think there's huge concern here. And I think Hazel brought up earlier the important point that with where we are at as a country right now with a federal administration, being a state that is a safe haven for a lot of folks who are under direct threat federally, we cannot be making these decisions to open up more power in the private sector, to open up more access to information and content and associations for marginalized individuals and groups. It is unreasonable to give up our First Amendment rights in this country, especially right now. And it's dangerous.
I couldn't agree with that more. I could not agree with that more. We have a question now from a member of the audience. They ask, for lawmakers who want to do something to protect kids from the harms of social media, what do you think is the best path forward? For a lawmaker who wants to do something about social media and kids online, what do you think is the best path forward?
I think that we can invest in digital literacy education. I think provide more resources for parents and schools. I do think working with social media platforms and trying to find a path forward where we can protect kids, but not at the expense of giving away our rights. I mean, I think there's lots of things we can do, but a lot of people don't understand that you can block things on your router, that you can block things on computers, that they don't know how to use parental controls. Like those things exist. And also, I think that we need to be more supportive community. Like if we've got people that if you're not working two jobs, you can usually be a more engaged parent in your kid's life, right? There's so many systemic issues that we see as a society that we actually should be addressing that would actually get at these problems. But this 86 is not the bill to address those concerns. It's not going to change the problems. It's just going to move them to another area. I'm pretty sure before social media existed, kids got access to drugs and did other things, right? That, I mean, I'm going to age myself, but I'm old enough that I remember before social media and the internet. And there were still plenty of drugs in my rural town. So there are other ways that we as a society need to be addressing these problems, not giving social media more platforms, more power, and not taking away our rights, is how I see it.
Thank. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Anaya.
yeah, I agree with Hazel. I mean, tech literacy education for kids, absolutely, but also for parents.
Mhm.
I think one of the huge gaps is that kids know how the tech works at a very early age, and those of us with kids don't understand nearly half as much as our children do. So they can get around things easy, and parents oftentimes aren't even going to notice that that's happening. So I think investing in tech literacy education for everybody across the state would be really beneficial. I do agree too that we
Yep.
often legislate solutions to problems without addressing the root causes of the problems. And when we have parents who are working two, three, four jobs, um, that they're not able functionally or reasonably to be around as much as they would like
Yep.
to, eroding constitutional rights to solve for these issues doesn't actually get to the root issue at all. But legislating those problems away, legislating in an effort to make sure that individuals and families have what they need to support themselves and their kids, that helps address the ongoing issues that we see across all issue areas, quite frankly.
Absolutely. Tech literacy. I heard both of you mention digital and tech literacy for not just young people, but parents. I have spoken to senators all across the country saying that I wish I could see public libraries, especially at public schools or even private schools, turned into digital resource centers for parents who don't know how to utilize social media or who don't know how to really check into what their kids are doing. Maybe this is something that state governments, federal governments could invest into, and we could even invite the tech companies whose platforms we are talking about today and in the future to be a part of that process. I have a 14-month-old son, and I'm pretty certain that the technology that I'm utilizing today, in 30 years, I won't know how to use it anymore. We're going to turn to a question, a hybrid from Jason McBride and Austin Jenkins with Pluribus News. Um, Austin asks, something that seems to be motivating this legislation is the number of teens who are dying from drug overdoses based on drugs procured via social media platforms. If not this proposed law, what can state lawmakers do to address the use of social media to traffic in deadly drugs?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, right? And it's a huge problem nationally. Um, and I think one of the things that legislators and governments tend to do is focus on the criminalization side of the overdose epidemic and drug use. The reality is, in Colorado at least, youth drug use has decreased over the past several years. We are seeing lower rates of use. And while that does not negate the tragedies that are occurring when a child overdoses, when a life is lost, that does not mean that criminalization is the answer. It doesn't mean that over policing is the answer. We have to start looking at legislative fixes to this horrific epidemic in the public health space through a harm reduction lens. We need to figure out what it is that people need to not move to drug use in the first place, especially when we're talking about kids, because they don't necessarily understand the consequences of those choices or the full breadth of what could potentially happen to them. We need better education. We need more robust public health, and we need to be legislating from a harm reduction lens.
I wholeheartedly agree. The drug use is the symptom of the problem. And it's not the whole problem, right? Why are kids doing drugs? Is there trauma? Is it experimentation? But also, like in Denver, you can get Narcan and you can get test strips, and those have actually saved lives and keep people safe. So, I mean, I know that's maybe not how everyone sees it, but I don't think criminalization is the issue because we know that repeatedly when that happens, we put poor people and people of color in jail and they stay there and that's historically what has occurred. And we need to look at it from a harm reduction side, not from a criminalization side. I wholeheartedly agree.
All right, thank you. We're going to thank you so much to our listening audience. There's a number of questions coming in. It's exciting to have so many of you engaged. We have one last question that we are going to answer today, and I wish we could get to the rest of them. Feel free to follow up with Anaya and Hazel and myself at Chamber of Progress. The final question for today is, if this bill is signed into law, how would a challenge play out in the courts? Who brings the lawsuit? Where does this case, where do you think this case would fall with regards to the United States Supreme Court ultimately?
I mean, I think we've seen similar legislation across the country, and generally, when those pieces of legislation have passed, we've seen usually net choice challenging those, right? Um, I think often it is the tech companies who are feeling overregulated. I think in this particular bill, some of those challenges would have to come from individual users who have been removed from the platforms. Um, and I think that landscape in the courts, and as somebody at the ACLU who is not a lawyer, uh, my perspective is that I think that landscape in the courts is a little uncertain right now, quite frankly. I think Supreme Court precedent, current case law points to the assumption that this type of legislation is likely not constitutionally valid. I think we will have more clarity on where the current court stands on that this summer, with some of the cases that are currently pending. Um, So I think it's a tricky question to answer in this particular moment. I mean, if current case law stands, then I think we see laws like this continuing to get struck down. But I think a lot of that is going to be dependent on the Paxton decision that we should hopefully have here in a couple of months.
I also want to point out that we as a state just cut $1.2 billion from our budget. We are cutting all of
Wow.
our resources. We're cutting our education. We're cutting so many programs this year. It's devastating when you look at what's happening across our state because of our laws. I don't think that we need to be using our resources, our very limited resources, going after or having these court fights that we know are likely unconstitutional and are going to be ruled that way. I think we need to be using our resources in ways that will actually protect our community and do more good.
Wow, Hazel, did you say 1.2 billion with the B?
With a B, 1.2 billion
Wow.
with a B.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, we're going to have to cut more next year. So this is not something that's going away. We are going to continue to cut resources. And when you're talking about cutting education, you're talking like, and education is probably what is needed in this situation
Yep.
so much more, right? So I mean, really, like, I why there is going to be court cases this summer. We are going to have more clarity around a lot of these issues. So why waste our resources on these court cases?
Wow. Well, there you have it, folks. Hazel and both Anaya confirms $1.2 billion with the B as in boy cut from the state budget. So this doesn't seem like a time for us to engage in costly legal battles like similar legislation in other states. This bill is similar to face that same fate. We've already seen federal courts strike down comparable laws in Arkansas, California, and Ohio, ruling that similar laws, violate the First Amendment by regulating lawful speech and placing unconstitutional burdens on online platforms. These decisions suggest that courts are highly skeptical of laws that force platforms to act as gatekeepers of speech. I want you all to join me today. Thank you to our panelists, Anaya Robinson from the ACLU of Colorado and Hazel Gibson from Progress Now, Colorado, for lending your voices, your expertise, and your passion to this critical conversation. What we've heard today is clear. SB 25-086 is not a solution, it's a threat. It's a threat to free expression, to privacy, and to digital civil rights of young people, especially those from Black, Latino, and LGBT and low-income communities who rely on these platforms to connect, create, and be heard. We cannot allow Colorado to become a testing ground for a digital dragnet that chills and treats platforms like police. We're grateful that Governor Polis has already voiced concerns about this piece of legislation, and we are calling on him now to follow through with a veto. Thanks again for joining us today and for standing on the side of freedom, innovation, and equity. Until next time, have a wonderful day.